Hello everyone, my name is Daniel Baker. It's great to be with you guys for this last video in our three-part series on the subject of orality. In our first video, we looked at the topic of why orality matters. Why is this a relevant conversation for today? Why do we need to be spending time looking at this subject? And then in our last video, we looked at oral discipleship strategies. What does that look like? What is an oral approach to training people, to teaching people to know Jesus and to live like him? And we looked specifically at the examples Jesus provides for us of how he went about making disciples. And today's video, I want to be very practical. I want to look at how can we harness orality? How can we take advantage of this? How does it work out practically? What are some things that we can give our attention to? You know, there's this big disparity in terms of the methods of teaching, the methods of communication that many leaders in the church, many people who are trying to reach the unreached, who are going into new places to plant churches, they're using methods that oftentimes are quite different from the preferences and the needs of the audiences we're trying to reach. In terms of their preference for communication, the way that they go about learning. So we need to close that gap between, we've been taught to do things this way, but actually the need and the preference is this way. So how can we close that gap so that the way that we're going about teaching, the way that we're going about making disciples is what is best and most effective for the audiences that we are trying to reach? You know, as those who are called to go and make disciples, those who are called to be witnesses and teachers of the gospel, we have to ask ourselves that question. We need to ask it again and again so that we can be getting better and better and better, more effective in the way that we teach, more effective in the way that we communicate, and in our overall discipleship goal, our desire to see mature believers raised up and being transformed day by day into the likeness of Christ. And what we have to be aware of is this takes more than just a shift in our communication. This is going to require, from many of us, a major shift in our way of thinking. It's going to take a shift in terms of our culture, how we've gone about interacting with people, how we've gone about training people, how we've gone about doing worship, how we've gone about doing church. So there's implications from orality for the way that we think or our conceptualization, for our communication, and for our culture. And many of us get stuck usually in the first part, when people, they start to get excited about this subject or they're aware that it's important. They focus in on simply the communication aspect. So they say, instead of using as much written text in our times together, I'll record a video or I'll send an audio message or something like that. But actually, the thinking behind a lot of the content we're creating, the thinking behind and the logic behind how we organize our teaching, how we organize the activities that we're doing together, much of it is shaped by a highly text-dependent logic. So we need to realize, actually, my brain needs to change. The way I've been thinking about this needs to change. And that takes a lot of work. It's like we need to rewire ourselves in order to become most effective for the audiences that we're looking to reach. And if you're like me, that actually is going to take a lot of work. It has taken me years to kind of reshape the way I've thought about doing discipleship. It's taken me years to rethink the implications of the work and ministry that I feel I've received. But it's so important that we do take those hard steps in the direction of learning about this and changing our approach. So today we're looking about some practical ways that we can actually make that shift, not just in terms of our communication, but actually the thinking behind the way that we train, the thinking behind our discipleship, as well as the culture, the actual makeup of what we do. How do we interact with each other? And I think there are three oral teaching methods that are really worth us taking time to think about and to think how we could apply in our own contexts where we're serving. Three oral teaching methods. The first is narrative, instruction, and storytelling. The second is practical demonstration and application. And the third is collective and creative assignments. So narrative instruction, what does that mean for us practically? Well, I'm a huge proponent of biblical storytelling. We have resources available that I'm helping to administrate, the biblicalstorying.com website or the Share the Story program. We have training that can help walk you through how to become a biblical storyteller. And my experience has been any context where I've gone through the hard work of learning stories by heart, gathering people, telling those stories, and leading them through discussion, I've found again and again and again it to be so impactful and to have such a shaping effect on the lives of those people I'm looking to gather. Just one story, a friend of mine, I shared with him one time, years ago, the story of Jesus healing the demon-possessed man in the land of the Gerasenes. And every time I saw that friend for about a year after, somehow that story would come up in conversation. And I could see that in all the different aspects of a new life as a believer that he was walking in, that story of one encounter with Jesus and the man's life was transformed. He was freed and he was commissioned and sent out to share about what Jesus had done for him. That story was so rich and so deep for my friend. It kept feeding him again and again and again. For a full year, that was the main thing that we discussed and we looked at. And even though it's a very simple approach, biblical storytelling, it's not easy. It is very simple. Learn a story, tell a story, discuss the story, obey the story. But actually, even though it's simple, it's extremely rich and deep. And my experience has been gathering people for groups, even though there's stories I might be familiar with, and maybe I've told those stories many times. Each time I tell it and interact with a story in a group, I see something new about that story. God speaks to me in a new way through that story. So if you haven't given it a try, I would highly suggest trying out biblical storytelling. It's very simple. It's not easy necessarily. We have to put in effort. We have to do it well. But it's a simple process that is very, very rich in terms of what it produces in us and in the life of the disciples that we are spending time with and that we are gathering. Also, I think story is so impactful and important in other contexts beyond just maybe a small group gathering to hear a story and have a discussion. In our churches, I think it's very important that we begin to press in more to narrative sermons, making sure that our teaching is related to the stories of Scripture and it's coming out. We're unpacking that story together as a group and thinking through the implications of that story. Personally, the model I've started to use is all the preaching time, all the sermons that I'm doing in my church, I begin by telling the story. Whatever passage I was given, I tell it as a story. And then usually I ask questions to the group, or maybe I bring people out from the crowd and I have them reenact the story in front of all the people. Obviously, that sometimes frightens people. They don't want to come up. They're shy to be in front of people. But actually, it really wakes the crowd up to be asked, oh, you come up, you come up, you come up. And you have to act out the story I just told. So I tell the story, we reenact it, and then once we've done that, I'll unpack the story and discuss the implications of what I feel God is speaking to us through the story and how we should be obeying what we're learning together as a church. And even though that's a pretty simple thing, I found it's been really helpful because these lessons that we know are important. Our aim as shepherds is to feed the sheep. So in your own context, what needs to be taught on, what issues maybe you need to address, what values you're trying to instill, what vision you're trying to give the people. We can pick stories and use those stories as the way of teaching those lessons. And then those stories will live on in people's hearts, and they become the basis from which our vision, our values, our teachings about what we need to obey and how we should be changed, all of that comes out of the story. But then that story continues to reside in people's hearts and continues to speak to them, continues to shape their worldview, versus maybe a more abstract teaching with some propositional points. And yes, people might be able to grasp those points, but how long are they going to remember them? Versus a story that's going to live in people's hearts and transform their worldview so that their behaviors, their feelings, their values, that they all begin to align with the teachings of Jesus and with a proper understanding of the kingdom of God, a proper understanding of the reality that we're living in. So I would highly suggest, if you haven't done it, engage with biblical storytelling. Do something to get some experience and see how it might work for you in your own context. And if you have any responsibility for preaching in the church or teaching, think about how you can incorporate more narrative, how you can base it in the stories of the scripture, and let that be the basis out of which you teach. Should become the medium within which we are trying to communicate our vision and our values, and drawing on these lessons of what God is speaking to us as Christian communities or church communities. The next oral teaching method is practical demonstration and application. We saw this in our video from before, the second video of Jesus's discipleship approach. He was very practical with people. He demonstrated things to people. He wasn't just teaching them, he was showing them a demonstration of what he had taught them. So if he taught them about raising the dead, or the power to forgive sins or transform lives, he also demonstrated that. He was healing the sick. He was raising the dead. He was casting out demons. He was forgiving sinners and gathering with them. So we need to really think about how we can teach practically, how we can demonstrate. If you want your community, or whoever it is you're looking to disciple, whoever it is you're looking to reach, if you want them to grasp certain truths, certain values, we need to think through, okay, how do I demonstrate that truth? How do I live out those values? How do I create environments where they can actually put what they're being taught into practice? We need to be really good about providing opportunities for mentorship, about providing space to invite people along into our lives so they can see us working out what we believe and what we're teaching them. We need to do really good about asking questions. We should ask questions and then ask questions and then more questions. And when we finish, we should ask more questions. This is really important for helping people to discover things for themselves, for having this deep, impactful learning experience. So we need to think about that. How can we practically demonstrate what we're teaching? And how can we give people opportunities where they can practice as well? How can we give them opportunities where they can apply what they have learned? I said in the last video, we only know what we can remember, and we only really know what we can use. If we're discipling people, we need to give them opportunities where they can apply what they have learned. And likely, there's going to be some feedback loops. Maybe as they begin to practice and apply it, we see, oh, they didn't quite get the full thing. They got some of it, but they haven't fully grasped it. And then you can continue to direct, continue to speak into that situation, continue to teach about whatever it is that you were teaching them. And they can see you continued this process of now they saw you demonstrate and they went and tried. You brought maybe some correction, you demonstrate again, they try again, and you keep doing this kind of performance-based pedagogy almost. Some of us from maybe more Western backgrounds, we don't like this idea of, rote memorization, or, we don't like this idea of performance-based teaching. But actually, it's very consistent with how we see Jesus making disciples. So we need to think about that. How do we create practical opportunities for people to put what they're learning into practice? This is going to be the best way for them to remember. It's going to be the best way to make mature disciples who are capable of reproducing what they've learned in the lives of others. Our third way of, or third method of oral teaching is through creative and collective assignments. So what do I mean by that? I think we need to be really good about stopping now where we're teaching unilaterally and begin leading people, thinking about leading people in a collective learning journey. So we need a lot more time to reflect, a lot more time for dialogue, a lot more time for questions, a lot more time for practice and application and demonstration. We need to be so good about that, and it should be together in community. Oftentimes, our strategy for discipling people is giving them things to do just on their own. Oh, go read this book. Oh, go watch these videos. Oh, go do this thing. How can we transform our strategies for discipleship and put them into a situation where actually people are doing this together? How can we be discipling people in community? Because when we go in it together, when we're on this collective learning journey, one, it's much more motivating. It helps people to continue, helps people to stay consistent and follow through with what they've been asked to do. But also, they're getting the benefit of saying, oh, I understood this and I got this, but this person understood this and they saw this come out of the stories, or, oh, they've gone out and practiced this and they had this experience. And there's this benefit of doing things together. So we need to be good about creating collective opportunities for discipleship and learning, but also launching more opportunities within our churches for creativity to come out. I love, in my different opportunities to teach on biblical storytelling, usually I have a session on creativity and the arts and utilizing the arts. And I make people do things that sometimes make them feel uncomfortable, whether it's drawing pictures that they have to share and interpret, whether it's doing a drama of the story. One of my favorites is coming up with story songs. And, when we go to different places where we're training in the world, especially in the East, in the global South, people are much more ready, much more happy to come up with these songs from the stories they've learned. When I've done it in the United States and other Western contexts, people always feel a little bit nervous and uncomfortable and shy. But actually, when they've gone through the process, engaging with their innate creativity, it releases something in people's lives so that the story they've learned or whatever it is that we're looking at, it just goes to a different level. It touches something different in their lives. And actually, sometimes it's really helpful as a feedback loop that when you have taught something and then you're requiring those people you've taught to go and to produce something with it, to write a song, to draw a picture, to do a drama, you have the opportunity of saying, hey, did they really learn what I meant to teach them? Did they really catch it? Or did they understand something different? Did they interpret it differently? Did they highlight the same values that I think I was trying to highlight through whatever it was that was being taught? So creating opportunities for people to use their innate creativity, I think a lot of that has lied dormant in many believers' lives. But this is something close to the heart of God. Our God is one who creates. In the beginning, there was nothing. There was only God. And then he spoke, and he began to create all that we see and know, all the land and all the animals and all the plants, as well as humans. And this innate creativity that comes from the heart of God is in each and every one of us. We have been made in the likeness of God. And so I think a big part of oral discipleship, a big part of putting this into practice and harnessing orality is thinking through, hey, how can we use the arts in our churches? How can we, especially as we go into different contexts, how can we use the ethnic art forms, the local art forms of different people groups that we're trying to reach, and use those as a tool for discipleship? Use those as a tool for those we are disciplishing to engage with what they're being taught, as well as tools for remembering what's being taught and reproducing, and opportunities to share with others. So singing, dancing, performance, drawing, poetry, whatever it may be, these sort of art forms can be a really, really effective tool for making disciples using oral methods. So these are kind of the three practical categories I wanted to highlight. Teaching through narrative instructions, storytelling, as well as practical demonstration and application, and finally, collective and creative assignments. And if you are not in a place yet where you've tried any of these methods, I would encourage you pick one and just experiment. Try to do something small and see what is your experience like. This is not one size fits all teaching. It's not going to be the same in every scenario or every context, but I do believe that if we begin to put in a real effort to harnessing orality, harnessing its power, we can be much more effective in making disciples, in preaching the good news, planting churches, and reaching the nations. Thank you again for taking the time to watch this video. Thank you for taking the time to go through this series. I do hope that it has been very helpful and that we begin to close that gap, maybe where we've been, between our audience and their needs and how we've been going about doing discipleship, maybe through more Western, abstract, individualistic models. Do reach out if you have any questions. I'm happy to make myself available. And you can see our website specifically for biblical storying resources. It's biblicalstorying.com. Share the Story is the program. We have videos there, as well as written resources to help you get started with your journey in biblical storytelling. But this goes so much beyond just biblical storytelling, what we're talking about. But it is a journey. It's a journey that we're on together, a journey of learning, of exploration, and of new experience that I believe if we give ourselves to, God will bless and use it to be very fruitful in seeing that command of seeing the call to make disciples fulfilled in the world today, and the unreached hearing the good news of Jesus Christ preached to them. Thanks again, and hope to see you all soon.